Hey, y'all, it's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us here today. Jeff Sentell later on as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. We will have a lot to get into there. Some of the recruiting stuff from last week we hadn't had a chance to talk about too much yet. We'll do that with Jeff coming up. We'll also deal off the top of the program here with the bad news of Nadab Joseph not officially going to join the Georgia class for 2018. Enrolling instead in junior college. We'll sort of figure out what that means to the Georgia secondary. In fact, let's start with that right now. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, it's good reporting by Jeff Sentell at DawgNation.com. It is unfortunately bad news, though. We'll have to deal with that off the top of the show. Nadab Joseph, a four-star defensive back, a signee as a part of Georgia's number one ranked class from 2018, is instead going to have to go the junior college route, take care of some academic stuff, and then after that, he's hopeful to get his college career started. And I guess, according to the story at DawgNation.com, the high school coach of Nadab Joseph still thinks that that career is going to take place at the University of Georgia. We'll have more on this from Jeff Sentell in a moment when he joins the show. And this is not, in a way, unexpected news necessarily. I mean, if you want to go back to December, the Alabama folks were trying to tell you, the fans were trying to tell you back then that, Alabama was going to offer scholarship to Nadab Joseph. They weren't going to send him a letter of intent because they knew his academic stuff was not squared away. We'll do more of that later on, and we'll kind of figure out from Jeff Sentell kind of what all that means when he joins us here in a few minutes. For now, though, let me talk about just the facts as we kind of understand them, kind of where we are on this subject. It is another member of the 2018 signing class, at least for the moment, unavailable for the Georgia secondary. Obviously, Devon Wilson suffers his injury, back during the spring. Nadab Joseph not coming here now. And I think that this puts a little bit of extra pressure on this group for the season. Now, luckily, and we touched on this briefly yesterday, luckily, this is thought to be a Georgia secondary that's pretty good. I think the caveat to that, though, is maybe pretty good with the starters. What's going to happen underneath that in terms of the guys that fill out the depth? In fact, when ESPN talked about its, number one strength, what makes the Georgia Bulldogs so dominant, one of the things they wrote about, and we addressed this yesterday, was that Georgia secondary. Let me read you a couple sentences here as a reminder of what Alex Scarborough at ESPN thinks about the Georgia defensive backs. He says they have to replace a few starters, but DeAndre Baker and J.R. Reed anchor what should be a solid secondary. Mix in the slew of top prospects recruited over the past 2 years, such as Amir Speed and William Poole, and the Bulldogs should be in good shape. That's Alex Scarborough there from ESPN saying some interesting things about the Georgia secondary. And one of the names that sort of jumps off the page there, because at this point in time, DeAndre Baker is thought of as a bit of a given. He's one of those guys that I think you sort of know what to expect from him, and I think you're counting on him to provide a big season. But the guy whose national stature has grown a good bit lately is J.R. Reed, the safety, a guy that came to Georgia as a Tulsa transfer, made a name for himself with outstanding play. And when you read a lot of these preseason magazine previews and things like that this time of year, virtually all of them in some form or fashion highlight J.R. Reed. He is a player that's grown to be one of the Bulldogs' leaders. When Kirby Smart met with the media a couple of weeks ago at one of those speaking tour stops, I believe this was in Columbus, Georgia, he threw some praise J.R. Reed's way as well as one of those additions, those pickups for Georgia, transfer additions that's worked out really well. Well, guess what? J.R. Reed's going to be counted on even more now, given the fact that another member of this Georgia secondary is not going to be available. Luckily for Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs, though, Kirby likes a lot about what J.R. Reed brings to the table.
I didn't know what we were getting. I knew that he was a really good athlete. I knew he was really fast. We didn't know much. We just heard. We talked to the coaches there where he was, and they all said he was a good player, and we were a little deficient in that area. And he's turned out to be probably the best decision that we've made from a standpoint of transfers, junior college players. I mean, I know he's not a junior college player, but he's a transfer, so it's like that was a huge get for us because we're struggling a little bit right now in the secondary from a standpoint of depth, and he's made it where we have 5 guys we can really play with right now.
So obviously Kirby Smart deserves to pat himself on the back a little bit for finding Reed, bringing him in. That's a nice pickup for the Bulldogs, but it's the other part of the clip there that's probably most important, that based on the way that Kirby Smart described that a couple of weeks ago, looking back on the work from during the spring, his description of, hey, just getting J.R. Reed, going and having him play well is really enough to get us to sort of the minimum 5 that you need just to be on the field in a sort of a nickel, star package, type, look out there, to say nothing of the depth. I mean, Kirby Smart speaks in no uncertain terms about some legitimate concerns about the Georgia secondary, both from the perspective of when spring practice is over, when he spoke those words a couple of weeks ago, and going back during the spring when Kirby Smart was watching the way that secondary was working out there. Kirby saw some reasons for concern then at that time as well, which once again puts the Nadab Joseph news sort of squarely in focus here for a lot of Dog fans. Here is Kirby echoing the sentiments of concerns about the secondary going back to the time of spring practice.
Yeah, we're a long way away in the secondary. As you know, there was a kind of a unique unit of DBs that had played for a long time around here. They had taken a lot of experience. So with them gone, we have been anticipating this void for 2 years now, and we've tried to get some guys in here, not only just signing in last year, that can fill that void, but we're not where we need to be. We don't have the depth we need, and we're not playing at the level we need to play. Now, I think they're going against 2 pretty good quarterbacks, and I think they're going against a good wide receiver unit. But we've got to play at a higher level in our conference, because our conference, to me, is full of experienced quarterbacks.
The unique DB situation that he's describing there, guys like Dominic Sanders and Aaron Davis, who seemingly played, a million snaps for Georgia. And as Kirby Smart says also, they knew that tenure was going to come to an end, that the experience that Sanders and Davis and others had brought to the table for Georgia, that was not going to last forever. They were going to have to be replaced. And to Georgia's credit, it tried to sign a bunch of defensive backs over the course of the last couple of recruiting cycles. Signed seemingly $1 million in 2017, but the jury is still out on many of them. Trey Bishop's future as a football player is up in the air at the moment. Guys like Latavius Brainy, Kirby Smart's openly challenged to kind of provide more on the field. I mentioned Devon Wilson's injury, and now Nadab Joseph not going to join Georgia, at least for the foreseeable future, because he's got to go to a junior college. It becomes an issue for a Georgia secondary who's trying to figure out the depth that it brings to the table, and it puts even more pressure now, I think, on one of the incoming freshmen that Georgia's almost for sure going to be counting on, Tyson Campbell. Now, the good news here when it comes to Campbell is he's the kind of player that potentially can shoulder the load. Let me go back to National Signing Day in February and listen to Kirby Smart throw some praise Tyson Campbell's way. And if you're a Georgia fan concerned about where the Dogs go with the absence now of Nadab Joseph, this reminder of just how good Tyson Campbell might make you feel a little better today. Here's Kirby again.
Tyson Campbell, what's not to love? First of all, he's an extremely high-character kid. This process took its toll on he and his family because he's a great kid. He's from a wonderful school that supplied University of Georgia with some really good players from American heritage, and he's a bright-eyed kid that enjoyed the process. He's a great track athlete, 10.4, 100 meters, and I don't know if you know much about that, but that's faster than pretty much anybody we've got on our team right now. So he's big and he's fast. He's 20.8, 200 meters. I mean, the guy can fly, and he's really competitive. Obviously, we know what the stature and the size bring, but more important than that on Tyson Campbell is his intangibles.
So that's good stuff there from Kirby Smart kind of weighing in on the situation with Tyson Campbell, and I sort of showed my ignorance on the show yesterday when it comes to track and field. That's not a sport that I know a ton about, but I have followed Campbell a bit this spring, when he stuck around for his second semester of high school to kind of run track there in Florida. And it sounds like, based on some of the reports that you see online, that he's even taken those track performances to another level this spring, putting up some big numbers there. So he brings the athletic quotient. You heard what Kirby Smart also says there in terms of the leadership that he brings to the table. This is a young man that there is a lot to like about, and that's great news. But the troubling part of this is it's good that he's got a lot of good things going for it, because Georgia's going to ask him to do a lot, especially given the fact that that right now defensive backs, in terms of guys that can actually be trusted to kind of get on the field and play, they are pretty scarce for UGA at the moment. I mean, the overall bottom line for the Nadab Joseph news is this is not necessarily unexpected. If you go to the forum at forum.DawgNation.com, our message board posters have been talking about this for quite some time. There has been a lot of online chatter about what Nadab Joseph's situation was going to be. Would he be one of these guys that would join Georgia when the 2018 class started enrolling here this summer? As it turns out, no, that's not the case. As it turns out, he's got some junior college work he's got to do. Jeff Sentell had good reporting on all that. But even though it's not necessarily unexpected, it still hurt. This is Georgia secondary that's looking to fill out its depth. I don't think that Kirby Smart is necessarily just kind of sandbagging when he says he's got some concerns there. It's one of those things we're going to be watching very closely here this summer. I think we trust Richard LeCounte, if you're a Georgia fan right now, to step in and be a really good starter. J.R. Reed, the aforementioned, is a guy that may go on to start him here this year, to say nothing of DeAndre Baker, who could very well be a first-round draft pick next spring. But there's still a few spots in that secondary that have got to be earned, including some of the key backup roles there. It'll be one of those things that the median fans alike are watching very close once practice begins, and it could go a long way towards determining just how successful Georgia will be on the season this fall. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Marco's Pizza, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. On video, DawgNation Facebook page, DawgNation YouTube page, the DawgNation Twitter feed as well. We're there live for you every morning at 10 a.m., and it's going to be back, by the way, at our regular time after being back from vacation yesterday. We were getting ready to get seated and get going yesterday, and the fire alarm went off. We had to delay the start of the show. Some of you had fun with that on social media yesterday on Twitter. That was kind of funny to see, but it's good to be back. Customary time, regular schedule. Jeff Sentell coming up. It's a perfect day for you to be with us here today on Marco's Pizza's DawgNation Daily. By the way, speaking of Marco's Pizza, they invite you to say hello to everyday value at Marco's. I love this deal. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. Every store, every day, the Italian way. It's at participating locations. And, you know, when you have, like, young kids like I do, and sometimes when mom is busy and not able to be at home, I'm left in charge of the dinner thing. And, listen, you got to feed these kids, but you also got to try to do it in a way that doesn't break the bank, and Marco's Pizza gives us a chance to do that. We really appreciate that. We'll have the podcast up for you later on today, wherever you can find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Android devices, all that stuff. And on the radio, going to be back with our friends in Athens at noon today on Athens Sports Radio 96 The Ref. We love our home there on the radio. We will get Jeff Sentell here in a few minutes, and as you might imagine, you know, since I was gone last week, there were a lot of recruiting stuff that sort of bubbled up that I'm dying to ask Jeff about, and I'm hopeful you're interested to hear his answers as well. We'll talk a bit about the situation with Georgia and Jalen Humphries, the defensive lineman from Mountain View that commits to Florida. You know, how much of a priority was Humphries for Georgia? Had Georgia started looking elsewhere, and you know, including some of the other names that we've kind of mentioned here on a DawgNation Daily from time to time? We'll let Jeff kind of weigh in on that. I mentioned Tresman Marshall yesterday, taking a lot of visits lately to Florida State. There's a lot of those 24/7 sports crystal balls kind of coming for a flip from Tresman Marshall away from Georgia towards Florida State. We'll find out. We'll let Jeff Sentell separate fact from fiction from us on that. We'll also have to begin our conversation with Jeff here in a couple of minutes, though, talking about the Nadab Joseph thing a little bit more. And, you know, I sort of dealt with this off the top of the show from the standpoint of how does this impact the Georgia secondary. I think it does put stress on you know, the key reserves here and that competition for the 2 deep to be a key backup. I think the absence of Joseph, the injury to Devod Wilson, I think that's an on-field challenge for Georgia. But one of the legitimate questions that kind of bubbles to the surface here with Nadab Joseph's announcement that he's heading towards junior college is what this meant for Georgia in its 2018 class, and did Kirby Smart make a mistake by offering a letter of intent to Joseph, given the fact that there was some reporting out there that Alabama was not going to do so, that Alabama knew the academic issue was what it was, that they knew that he wasn't going to be able to get qualified to be an enrollee. Initially wanted to be an early enrollee, and you know, now not qualified to be a summer enrollee either. Alabama knew this, therefore they were going to withhold their letter of intent. Did Kirby Smart and Georgia make a mistake? This is one of those deals where Jeff Sentell's more qualified to answer that question than I am. I can only give you my opinion, but I've never shied away from giving you my opinion, and here's my opinion on this. You know, if there was another elite recruit that could have used that scholarship from Georgia, then Kirby Smart probably made a mistake. You know, for instance, if it came down to a numbers issue on a guy that was out there for Georgia and taking Joseph meant saying no to somebody else, then that's obviously a mistake. Only Jeff Sentell can tell us if that indeed happened or not. What we do know is this was a major PR win for UGA. This was getting a flip from Alabama. This was building a number 1 overall class. This was a lot of buzz for Georgia back during this December time frame when this happened, and frankly, it was a bit of a ding on Alabama, so much so that it almost seemed like some sources within the Alabama program were looking to get the story about the academics out to sort of save face after what had been a pretty rough early signing period for the Alabama Crimson Tide. For me, from that standpoint, it's sort of a no harm, no foul situation. there is a lot about the recruiting world that's about, creating the perception of momentum, creating the perception of, hey, this is the place to be and this is the program where all the energy is. And I thought that Georgia did a good job of that over the course of the 2018 cycle, of making Georgia seem like the program that had the bullet next to its name. Even though Alabama would end up being the reigning national champion, Georgia looked like the program that was on the rise, and Alabama looked like the program that was trying to catch up. The younger, more energetic Kirby Smart in comparison to the older, maybe more stately, maybe, in comparison to Kirby, more tired Nick Saban. I think flipping Nadab Joseph from Alabama to Georgia, I think it worked. I think it worked in terms of creating that perception. Now Joseph's at junior college and wants to figure out where his career goes from here. He won't be bound to Georgia when that time, at the JUCO is done. But in terms of a PR battle, Joseph was a part of a big win for UGA over Alabama, and the sort of shrapnel from that win, I think, continues here today. So from that standpoint, that's my perception on what went down with Nadab Joseph. We'll let Jeff Sentell tell us more about it. We're glad you're with us. Looking forward to talking to Jeff right now. It's a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All as DawgNation Daily rolls on right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Here on Tuesdays with Jeff Sentell, we call it our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All because Jeff and I are both big fans of Marlowe's Tavern, a great place to spend this summer. They got a great summer menu coming up here, by the way, too. You can check that out. We'll be telling you more about that in the weeks ahead here. In fact, I believe Jeff and I both have a little date coming up to Marlowe's to sample some of this summer menu stuff. We're really excited about that. Jeff, there is a lot to get to today, but I haven't talked to you in more than a week, so let me say good morning and hello to you. Thanks for being a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All here today.
Hey, Brandon, man, good to hear that voice again, man. I hope you vacated well. And I hope you maybe took the blind squirrel along with you on vacation as well, because he also earned some of that time off as well, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a well-earned vacation for our buddy Eddie here also. And so, Jeff, let me kind of dive into this. And I was sort of talking about Nadab Joseph a moment ago. You had great reporting on this yesterday at DawgNation.com, really the first to break the story that Joseph was going to head to junior college as opposed to being a part of this 2018 class for UGA. And I guess the question on the minds of a lot of Georgia fans is, did Kirby Smart make a mistake? You gave a scholarship to a player that there was some reporting even back in December that Joseph wasn't going to be able to qualify. You gave a scholarship to him, a letter of intent to him, which means you couldn't have used it on somebody else. Did Georgia have to say no to an elite prospect in order to bring Joseph in? And does that end up being a mistake here for UGA in your mind?
Well, no, Brandon, because I think, I guess that kind of just allows us to kind of look at the whole issue of a prospect and their qualifications and where things stand for them in December of their senior year. By and large, I've got a kind of a personal thing that, I'm all about being an aggressive reporter, and I want to know all this information, but it's not my business to kind of put a prospect, business and academic hardship out there before it's kind of go time, like decision time. The path is clear. Will anybody know the true answers about what Alabama felt and what Georgia felt? It's going to be hard to do unless you get those guys together in a room and discuss recruiting, which won't happen. But the thing there is you got to look at what maybe the Alabama perspective was, and there's widespread reports that Alabama didn't even send him a letter of intent. That usually, to me, in my experience, leads me to believe that they concluded that there was no way he was going to become eligible. And maybe they needed to prioritize their DB slot for other guys who were likely to become eligible, and they signed other guys to play that spot in their 2018 class. And in other cases, it happens a lot, Brandon, where it's a grade, I call it the grow-up pill gets taken, and the light bulb comes on. There's some extreme work that is done in the classroom and within ACT testing and the sliding scale in order to get guys eligible. I kind of look at that as maybe Nadab Joseph had a 2nd and 26 of his own to try and pull off in the classroom with his transcript. And sometimes you'll find a lot of schools that try to feel like that prospect is a good enough player to kind of roll the dice and see if he can become eligible, especially if he can gain eligibility in one semester at a junior college like we saw with Devontae Wyatt rather than 2 semesters. So I think Nadab Joseph, these are just my perceptions of this situation. For Georgia to be able to extend the scholarship offer when perhaps Alabama did not, that leads to my conclusion is I think the Georgia staff felt that he could become eligible in time if the right courses were taken. Apparently that wasn't the case. He enrolled at Independence Community College yesterday on Monday, and they wanted to get him in the summer semester as fast as possible. The expectation there, I've been told by multiple sources, is that Nadab Joseph can transfer out and graduate and sign with a 4-year school in 18 months. In 18 months at the most, and I know that's what Joseph and his inner circle are hoping for as well.
And also, I guess the coach had mentioned the fact that he thinks that Joseph will still come to Georgia, but it's worth pointing out here, he won't be bound to UGA. This will be a recruitment that, for the most part, sort of starts over again once Joseph comes back out on the other side of this junior college tenure here. Does the fact that he was a Georgia signee at one point, do you think that gives, I guess, Georgia a leg up here? I mean, it's also a long time in the future. Who's to say where things are for Joseph or UGA when you start thinking about 18 months from now?
Yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces there. Maybe Georgia doesn't need safeties and defensive backs quite like Joseph. Maybe they're chock full at that position from the 19 class, kind of like the way they are kind of the offensive guard spot now. I think that Georgia will always need a defensive back like Joseph. He's one of the top 200 players in the country this year, and he has the rare ability to play corner or safety. He's got that South Florida speed as well. But I do see things kind of the way that you're hinting at right there, Brandon. I think there will be some loyalty to Georgia because Georgia stuck through him and offered him a scholarship and believed in him. But essentially, in my view, I'm going to look at this as the reset button on our recruitment. He's going to be a class of 2020 prospect, most likely, going forward. And I do feel that Alabama will have a heck of a chance to sign him in the class of 2020 should they rate him very highly on their board as well. I think Georgia will have some sort of loyalty and attachment because of all those ties they made to him over the last few months. You got to remember his Final Three. Georgia was in his Final Three along with LSU and other schools. So that's something to think about, but right now, Nadab Joseph is at Independence Community College. Oddly enough, we're another major target for Georgia in the 2019 class. Jermaine Johnson also matriculates at this time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I want to talk to you about Tresman Marshall here in a moment. Before that, let me do one more on the Nadab Joseph issue here, and this is what we dealt with off the top of the program today. You've got Devod Wilson dealing with an injury. You've got Trey Bishop, whose future is very much up in the air. Latavius Brini has been openly challenged by Kirby Smart. There's really little to know about many of those other 2017 defensive back signees. If you're a Georgia fan, Jeff, it seems legitimate to be concerned about you're too deep when it comes to the defensive secondary. Your starters may be pretty good. Obviously, Baker may be a first-round pick. I'm going to hope that Tyson Campbell ends up being a starter. Obviously, J.R. Reed is going to get all kinds of accolades. You can go on and on about the guys that may be the starters for Georgia, but that sort of second-string group, that too-deep group, if you're a UGA fan, that may be one of your causes of anxiety this summer, right?
Well, I do think Joseph was talented enough that he was going to put his name in the conversation at the too deep, maybe even at safety. But I think what it does now is it just puts the onus on more of those 2017 heralded signees, guys like the previous Brini, Eric Scope, William Poole III. Those guys, this has got to be their time in Athens. There's the uncertain statuses right now of both Trey Bishop and D'Angelo Gibbs. They can't certainly be seen as a stable commodity and a proven commodity right now on either side for the Georgia when 2018 defensive back rotations are concerned right now. So I think that's a situation where you look at those guys in 2017, those guys are going to have to play some ball. I think the Nadab Joseph news is also multiplied by the injury to Devod Wilson. Mark Webb Jr., I feel, will come back full speed and ready to go this fall. That was a slight knee injury that he will be able to recover from. And also a guy like Amir Speed, that's another name where he's got to show and he's got to flash in fall camp to get into that rotation as well. And the 2018 signees now, Otis Reese is a guy that's going to get his first look at safety. I feel that Tyson Campbell will be an immediate contributor somewhere in the rotation at star really early in his time in Athens, given his size and athleticism. There's also the name Chris Smith as well. Chris Smith is a guy that can see a little opening like this of playing time and make the most of it. I'm never going to count out Chris Smith for what he can do physically, intellectually, his toughness and his instinct. He's going to play a lot of ball for Georgia, and he's going to be maybe a more talented Aaron Davis type player for Georgia in the secondary.
I will say this about Chris Smith, Jeff. We interviewed him twice. You've interviewed him a million times. I interviewed him with you twice. Once in January at the Touchdown Club of Atlanta Awards Banquet. He was also with us at one of our Marlowe's Tavern broadcasts. His personality, in terms of the dedication he's shown to making himself not just a better football player, but just a better athlete in general, it's really impressive. In January, he'd clearly gained some weight from the time we'd interviewed him before. This is a guy that's, he is a dedicated performer. He is dedicated to his craft here. So I think it's interesting that you bring him up because, you have to be a pretty plugged-in recruiting person. I'm talking about regionally or nationally to know the name Chris Smith. But a lot of Georgia fans may find out who this is and find out that he was one of those diamonds in the rough for that 2018 class pretty quickly here, because I would not put it past him to kind of come in and do like what a Trey Blunt did last year, just work so hard that you find yourself on the football field. I would not put that past Chris Smith at all.
Yeah, simply put, this is what I always say about Chris Smith II. I think he's going to be a phenomenal football player at some point of his career at Georgia, and I think he's even going to be an even greater success in life off the field. He just has every element, checks every box, and of course he's not 6'2" and 195 pounds, but that's okay. Georgia, in his scheme, they can use a guy like Chris Smith, and he can make a lot of plays for the Bulldogs in the years to come.
All right, let's talk about Tresman Marshall here. He is a UGA commit, but boy, he has really been taking his visits. He was at Auburn recently. I guess 24/7 Sports has reported he's been to Florida State like 3 times in the last couple of weeks. There's all kinds of crystal ball predictions coming in at that website about Marshall flipping to Florida State. But to talk about this, you also have to talk about the other moving pieces for Georgia, the linebacker position. Nakobe Dean, the relationship with he and Georgia continues to sort of be strong here. There is some thought that Rian Davis is obviously solid in the mix for UGA here. I mean, let me start with the guy that's committed to Georgia and Marshall, because a lot of Dog fans really like him, and then sort of tell me about how all these moving pieces sort of fit in together here.
Yeah, Brandon, that's a good point. That's a good thing to bring up. I know everybody's going to worry, and it's like you got to put the worry pot on and put it on maybe simmer with guys like Jaden Hazelwood and Tresman Marshall taking their visits. But Brandon, these young men are only doing what they said they were going to do when they committed. When they committed and they chose Georgia, they said, I'm still going to take my visits. It's just the fact that they're now taking them and they're going to all these schools has a lot of people worried, and it's the type of stuff that drives recruiting headlines and recruiting page view traffic. Exactly what Tresman Marshall is doing right now is he is doing a massive research project right now. He is going to cram and to look at as many schools as he can, and he's going to try to play king of the mountain with Georgia. Georgia's on top of the mountain for him, and if any school can knock Georgia off, they're going to give him the chance to do it. He's going to give them the chance to do it. And for these young people, Brandon, they deserve it. That's the way they want their recruiting to go. More power to them for making sure that's the right choice, because if they get to their sophomore year and they're not playing a lot and they're thinking about a transfer, they can look back to their time as a high school prospect and say, you know what, dude, I wasn't naive. I exhausted all my avenues. I checked all my boxes. And what Tresman Marshall told me he was going to do is he's going to make all these visits. He's going to see everybody multiple times. And if nobody can sway him from Georgia, be it Auburn, be it Tennessee, be it Florida State, then Georgia's going to come out of that race on top at the end of the summer. He's going to make Georgia his leader, and he's going to be at Georgia and be visiting Athens every possible home game he can as a very committed recruit. Will he take all of his officials? Yeah, he probably will. But the thing for Georgia to think about, where I'm going to connect the dots, is they're setting up scenarios for whichever way this thing goes, they'll be prepared. If Tresman Marshall is not a part of Georgia's 2019 class, Nakobe Dean, those fires right there are very hot. He's planning to come back into Georgia, come back and visit Georgia again this week. He won't do it with family this time, but he will do it with his coach and a couple of teammates that are also on the recruiting radar. Rian Davis has visited Georgia again recently. He's a guy that's trending towards Georgia as well. And, truth be told, I'm going to look at Rian Davis after I started speaking with him and scouting him. I'm going to look at him a lot like the Quay Walker of the 2018 class, a big kid with a lot of size, some great instincts and athletic ability. They can play inside linebacker and outside linebacker for Georgia. So what Georgia's doing, they currently, if they wanted to sign every linebacker prospect they like, they're not going to have enough slots for everybody. But what they're doing in this case is with the recruitments of Marshall and the moving pieces there of Dean and Davis, just giving them a lot of flexibility for the class down the line.
It's our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. It's with Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily. By the way, if you want to keep up with everything going on at the Marlowe's nearest you, become a Marlowe's Insider. Text the word Marlowe's, that's MARLOWS, to 24242, and you can become a Marlowe's Insider and find out about all the great things happening at a restaurant that Jeff and I both love, which is Marlowe's Tavern. All right, let me do a quick follow-up on that, because I, for the most part, agree with everything that you've said there. I have said many times that if you want to swim in the deepest possible recruiting waters, you've got to be okay with commits that take visits. I don't change my tune on that about Tresman Marshall or Jaden Hazelwood or any of the other UGA commits who are taking visits. But if you want to go back to 2017, Jeff, Kirby Smart on National Signing Day did sort of allude to the fact that having so many rock-solid commits in the 2017 class, guys that were not taking visits other places, did help Georgia in sort of recruiting other guys because they were able to sort of focus intensity on uncommitted recruits, and that helped Georgia build a number 3 overall class in 2017, which would have been good enough for number 1 in many years there. So Kirby Smart has said that rock-solid commits do help. I mean, how do you square that with, some of this year's leading UGA commits not being at least rock-solid enough not to take visits other places?
Yeah, well, Brandon, the only way you can look at that, you kind of touched on my answer there in one of your earlier comments, is this is a different Georgia, man. They're not coming off an 8-5. They're not coming off a disappointing 10-3 season where they lost the 3 games that they were supposed to under the only 3 games that were really tough games on the schedule in Mark Richt's final year. This is a season where Georgia's coming off a national championship berth. They went to the brink of overtime, and they're going to recruit in the deepest Marianas Trench waters imaginable now. They're going after a higher quality of recruit. If you look at what Kirby Smart's doing this year with this class, it is quality over quantity. Georgia only has 8 commitments right now, and they're still in the top 10. They are the only school in the top 20 right now, Brandon, that has fewer than 9 commitments and also has yet to take a 3-star recruit.
Yeah.
Georgia is stressing quality right now, and that's why you just said it a minute ago, Brandon. When you're going after the very biggest fish, you have to expect an all-out fight and an all-out war for those guys. And President Marshall may be taking visits. Jaden Hazelwood may be taking visits. Trust me, I would imagine that any staff in the country, especially that one in Athens, would much rather have those guys committed to their program and other schools trying to knock those guys off than vice versa.
I was out of town last week. We didn't have a chance to talk after Jalen Humphries, the defensive lineman from Mountain View High School, committed to Florida. I know you've written a lot about this, but in way of conversing here as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All, what happened there with Humphries? It seems like there's always an information campaign that starts up after something like this, whether it be, Georgia fans on message boards saying, oh, that's okay, we didn't want him, whether it be, what the Florida side's going to say about all of this. I mean, what did go down in terms of Humphries with Georgia and then ultimately choosing Florida?
Well, it was just simply a matter of, I remember seeing Humphries. He really liked Georgia a lot. He was wanting to draw out his recruitment and reveal his public decision on senior night, which would have been November, over there at Mountain View High School in Gwinnett County. But he was just ready, man. Jalen is a guy that is a very purposeful young man. He already knows what he wants to major in, what he wants to be studying. He wants business. He wants finance. He wants to own his own home building company one day. He wants to build homes and sell homes. That type of stuff, Brandon, when I hear that from a high school senior to be, it's stunning because nobody really has their ducks in a row like that. Especially not even college juniors have their ducks in a row like that. So to hear that from Humphries, I knew he was going to be very purposeful and have a specific mindset about his decision. And it just seemed like to me, when I spoke to him in the weeks leading up to his decision, he just said that Georgia wasn't recruiting him as hard as other schools. Everybody can read between the lines there what you want. I would reference the last segment of our conversation where I talked about quality over quantity. Jalen Humphries was at G-Day with his family, had a great time, but something happened there where it became clear to him that Georgia did not value him as much as the other schools did. And that's a situation for Florida to come right in and take a pretty good guy. I think Humphries has value as maybe a future great standout on the defensive line, but also a guy that has NFL talent at offensive guards down the line. That never remember how all these pieces work, though, Brandon. Florida didn't sign a legit defensive tackle prospect at all in their 2018 class, so they had to go all in. They had to reel in a guy like Humphries in their 2019 class to start shoring up that area. And I think that's a reason why the Gators, especially with the new staff, have to come in and get their guys, especially when the depth chart is a little light in that area. Georgia fans know what we're talking about here with defensive tackle. Tramel Walthorpe will not be in Athens this fall, and defensive line is a huge priority now for Georgia in the 2019 class. But it's kind of going to be those specific defensive linemen, C.J. Clark, Josh Ferris, Travon Walker. Those are the names that I feel are right there at the top of the Georgia board when it comes to that position.
And we're getting pretty close to a C.J. Clark decision, I believe, so that's going to be kind of a fun thing to watch out there. All right, let me try to squeeze in a couple things here real quick. I've obviously kept you long. I haven't had a chance to talk to you very recently, though, so I want to try to get as much information as I can here as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Jeff, when I got back from vacation, I sort of sat down with a lot of Sentell intels and try to cram a bunch of them at one time. And probably my favorite one were all the quotes that you got from Tyreek Stevenson. He is a popular player with a lot of UGA fans because I'm sure you've seen this too. Message boards sort of pop with him a lot. I've talked before about there not really being an alternative to not getting Andrew Booth if that were to happen for the class of 2019. And I have UGA fans tell me all the time, no, Tyreek Stevenson. That's a guy that I'd like to see Georgia get. That's a defensive back that can be as good maybe as Andrew Booth. It seems like you found Stevenson to be a pretty interesting prospect when you had a chance to speak to him, right?
Yeah, one first thing to think about is all those recruiting pages you read about with Tyreek Stevenson, they need an update. He's about 6'1.5" and about 205 pounds. That's a very big body, very athletic, very lots of length, lots of size, lots of playmaking ability out of Tyreek Stevenson. He's made 5 trips to Georgia so far in his recruitment. His mom's already been up there. His family's been up there. I wouldn't be surprised if that number goes up to 8 trips to Georgia by the time this summer is over with, considering there's a huge event coming down in July where a lot of the recruits, once the dead period lifts back up at the end of July, I think Georgia's going to try and unveil their weight room, their new recruiting room, and a lot of the high-profile targets will be invited up to kind of attend that and check that out on unofficial visits. So Tyreek Stevenson, that's a name, especially with all these ripples in recruiting, Brandon. There's a name right there with Tyreek Stevenson that, considering what's just happened with Nadab Joseph, Georgia's going to look a lot harder at the defensive back position, and maybe that creates another slot. Georgia's going to have to sign an additional guy in the defensive backfield with this class. And Tyreek Stevenson, huge name going forward. Lewis Sine is another name going forward. That's the 4-star safety, nation's number 3 safety, just coming off his official visit to Penn State. Interesting how Georgia has kind of set it up, and this is a Kirby Smart trick right here. They set it up where they want to have one of Lewis Sine's last official visits. That will come during the season or maybe even after the season. Okay. A lot of recruits are telling me that Georgia's going to try and line up a lot of their recruits late in the year when Georgia's playing big ball games and late in the year when Georgia is contending for more of those shiny rings and those big things in 2018. And it's something, Brandon, that I'm going to give credit to one member of our message board who said this, where other schools are hosting these huge recruiting events and they wish that, cookouts or grill outs, and they wish Georgia did more of the same, despite that very successful scavenger hunt. And I think one of our forum members astutely put, you missed the 3 big events that Kirby Smart scheduled for recruiting over the last year. That was the SEC championship game, the Rose Bowl game, and the national championship game, and also that signing day coverage where they signed the nation's number 1 class. So there was 4 big events for Georgia in the 2018-2019 recruiting cycle that should be seen as kilowatt, megawatt size recruiting and lightning rods for UGA recruiting.
All right, I was going to talk quarterbacks with you. We'll have to do that on Friday because there's been a lot of developments with that, and you've done good reporting on that. Let me squeeze this in here really quick, though, as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. Harry Miller is a prospect that I really like. In almost any other recruiting cycle, this would be, I think, one of the prized, possessions potentially for UGA, because it seems like he's certainly destined for a real leadership role, team captain type situation. He commits to Ohio State. I mean, it's just bad luck for UGA, right, that you've got this elite in-state interior offensive lineman at a time in which Georgia looks like a factory producing interior offensive linemen. This is just a logjam that couldn't be overcome here when it comes to Harry Miller.
Harry Miller, first of all, is a 4.0 GPA, so he's obviously smarter than both you and I. He's going to be a valedictorian. He does incredible mission work in Nicaragua, and I'm going to just look at it like this. He's smart enough to see the names, the Corey Johnson, Solomon Kinley, Justin Schaefer, Ben Cleveland. Those guys are the incumbents on the Kendall Baker. Those guys are the incumbent guards, Lamont Galliard, that are on the UGA roster. But then he's also smart enough to see, stallions like Jamari Salyer, Trey Hill, Warren Erickson, also coming in to play that spot where Georgia has recruited the guard position as well as anyone in the country, especially the interior line slot. And I think, far be it from me to ever question what Sam Pittman's done, because I think he's batting about 875 right now when it comes to UGA recruiting and getting his guys on the offensive line. But I think Georgia's going to look back in a couple of years and see what Harry Miller has become, and they're going to be like, wow, sure would have liked to have him in our program doing what he does. But you're going to have to balance that with the thought of Warren Erickson could be a 3-year starter at Georgia, could be another David Andrews type, another Ben Jones type for the Bulldogs. And you also look at what Jamari Salyer and Trey Hill are doing, not just potential, but already in early production and already putting, walking the walk that backed up all this recruiting talk. And you look at a guy like Hill, you look at a guy like Salyer, and those guys on the interior of the line can also play some center if necessary. And you're going to sit there and go, well, we have a first or second rounder that we just signed out of that class, and we lost the first or second rounder like Harry Miller that Ohio State got out of that class. You can't have them all. I think Georgia will look back and say Harry Miller was a guy we sure would have loved to add in the class, but where in the world was he going to fit into the depth chart with all these other guys?
Hey, Jeff, it's great stuff. Thanks for being so generous with your time. It's fun to catch up with you again here as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All. We'll look forward to reading a whole bunch more from you at DawgNation.com, the Sentell Intels. I love the morning release, by the way, for the Sentell Intel. That's when I had come to expect that. It's exciting to see that back in the morning again, and look forward to reading a bunch more from you and talking to you here again on DawgNation Daily very soon, too.
Hey, Brandon, glad you liked it. The bosses let me open up the playbook and run it the way I wanted to run it this summer, and we wanted that to go up in the morning because a lot of readers wanted to see it that way as well.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
See you, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
We sort of had a feeling this would be one of those Sentell conversations here as part of our Marlowe's Tavern Tell-All that was going to stretch there for a while. I had a lot of stuff I wanted to get into with Jeff. It's been a while since we've had a chance to talk, and obviously it's kind of good to catch up on the recruiting stuff. And I love the fact that Jeff doesn't really pull punches there. At the end he talks about Harry Miller, a guy that maybe one day Georgia might regret not getting. Interior offensive lineman from Buford going to Ohio State. And I guess what's frustrating about this is, and I said this to Jeff a moment ago, in almost any year, almost any recruiting cycle, Miller would have been as coveted a prospect as you could possibly get for UGA, but he does come on the heels of unprecedented success in terms of recruiting offensive linemen, especially guys that are interior offensive linemen. But that description from Jeff about a valedictorian, future team captain maybe, those ideas. I mean, Georgia has done a really good job lately with populating its roster with players who sort of fit that criteria. It's really interesting. When you talk to a lot of Georgia players now, we had Jeb Blazevich on for our DawgNation postgame show after G-Day. And many of you watch the show. You all love Jeb. And you got to hear more from him that day than you've heard from him, in just the brief press conference things that happen from time to time. And what I heard from so many of you was, wow, Jeb, he's a super sharp, smart guy. And it's amazing how many of those guys that Georgia are currently bringing in, that just, in addition to having the football characteristics nailed down, they're just smart. They're well-spoken. They're worldly, they're doing the kinds of things like Harry Miller's done, taking the mission trips to Nicaragua and things of that regard. I mean, Kirby Smart's doing a good job of, because he can be so selective but the players that he brings in. He's doing a good job of finding guys who sort of check every box. You heard this about Tyson Campbell a moment ago. Kirby describing the fact that not only is he a great athlete, a world-class sprinter, but he's also sort of the guy that does the intangible things as well. He's a leader, and you love having guys who are more than just football players. It seems like Harry Miller was going to be one of those guys, so we wish him well, I guess, at Ohio State. But for a lot of Georgia fans, that was a guy they would have liked to have seen as a part of the 2019 class. Let me transition here to our SEC through here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. I mentioned earlier Alabama recruiting stuff, and there is this comparison that's going to be going on between Alabama and Georgia because of the fact that Alabama had been the bull of the woods when it comes to recruiting the SEC. Georgia overtook the Crimson Tide this past recruiting cycle, much to the dismay of many Alabama fans. Alabama has been on a bit of a run here for its 2019 class, though, getting another 4-star pickup in DeMarco Helms. That is a safety who chooses Alabama over Clemson here. It is an example of some recruiting momentum that Alabama's been able to establish. But, I find myself restating here for Georgia kind of what I've said over and over again, going back to last year when it seemed like the recruiting efforts for UGA were a little slower than some of the other programs. We didn't know then how robust it was going to be by the time you got to December, and certainly by the time you finished up in February. And my assumption is that Kirby Smart has now bought all the goodwill he needs from Georgia fans when it comes to this kind of stuff. Alabama making a bit more noise right now. Some other programs making a bit more noise than UGA. But as Jeff pointed out, if you look at those 24/7 Sports Composite team rankings, Georgia is up near the top with fewer commits than the other programs. It's being very selective about the players that it's bringing in, not taking a 3-star commitment yet. I don't have anything to worry about when it comes to Georgia, but it is worth pointing out that Alabama is building another big-time class here again after kind of, I think by its own standards, certainly falling well short of that for the class of 2018. Florida adds a graduate transfer, a defensive end from West Virginia named Adam Schuler here. He'll have 2 years of eligibility. This is an example of Florida doing what it needs to do, and something that I think that Tennessee, for the most part, has been better at than Florida. Jeremy Pruitt has sort of found ways to make Tennessee's roster a little better here and there. Take in the transfer player from here. Take in the extra recruit from there. He's done, I think, a better job of that thus far than Dan Mullen is. I won't pretend to be an expert on Adam Schuler. It looks like he's a guy that's played some. I don't know how good he is necessarily, but if you've got the roster spot available, an experienced college football player is not a bad person to bring in. This is an example of Dan Mullen, I think, doing what has to be done. Jim McElwain, the thing that he did worse was not the unsubstantiated death threat claims. It wasn't his likeness to the guy on the shark. The worst thing that Jim McElwain did for Florida was deplete the roster. He was just not a good recruiter, and he did not take that part of the game seriously. At least apparently he did not, and the Florida roster suffered because of it. That's the work that Dan Mullen's got to do. It's not his expertise in terms of tutoring quarterbacks. It is his ability to just to restock that roster with guys who are capable of playing in the SEC. I thought this was interesting, by the way. Brett McMurphy had this. McMurphy used to work for ESPN. Now I guess sort of out on his own Facebook page. He put out there, the new crop of bowls that could be coming into college football. One of these is a Myrtle Beach Bowl, which I think would be really interesting. You want to talk about one of the great destinations for like a weekend getaway. Probably one of the best golf travel destinations really anywhere in the world. Beautiful beaches, great restaurants. Myrtle Beach getting a bowl game to me seems like a no-brainer. I think that could be a lot of fun for college football. But what's even more fun than that, McMurphy's reporting that the Las Vegas Bowl, which has sort of historically been kind of an afterthought bowl, one of the early December bowls that doesn't usually have too sexy of a matchup, they're looking to change that in a big way. McMurphy's reporting that it could be Pac-12 versus SEC. It'd be like pick 2 or pick 3, I want to say, from the Pac-12 against sort of like a pick 4, pick 5 type thing from the SEC, if I have the slots correct on that. But sort of an upper-tier SEC team against an upper-tier Pac-12 team in Las Vegas. How much fun would that be? What a great trip, for Georgia fans who went by the tens of thousands to South Bend, who, filled up Southern California for the Rose Bowl, many of which went through Las Vegas to get there because they couldn't get hotels anywhere in L.A. How about the idea of a Las Vegas tie-in for the SEC and the Las Vegas Bowl? That would be a lot of fun. We're actually going to do a little bit more on this coming up in a moment on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Before that, let me squeeze in one more SEC through story, though. 3 SEC teams punched tickets if you'll pardon the cliche for the College World Series. Arkansas gets in by virtue of beating South Carolina last night. Mississippi State won its Super Regional against Vanderbilt. And Florida beat Auburn. Now, Georgia fans don't like Auburn or Florida, so I guess Dog fans are hoping they both could have lost. In fact, some of you said that to me on social media last night. But it was a disastrous moment for the poor Auburn outfielder, I guess, who saw a ball bounce off his glove, go over the fence, ends up being a walk-off home run for Florida, putting the Gators in the College World Series. So 3 SEC teams do make the College World Series. Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Florida will make that your SEC through. All right, here on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Every day at this time, we do our Dog Day Q&A. It's just sort of a fun, lighthearted kind of question and answer situation. I take comments. Some of you respond live on the video. Some of you reach out to me later on Twitter at Dog Nation Daily. And today, in honor of Brett McMurphy's report that the SEC could get a tie-in with the Las Vegas Bowl, I want to find out from you, what would be your dream bowl destination for UGA? Now, my assumption here is you'd be looking to make the trip. Now, what's kind of funny about a conversation like this is that up until last year, the, quote, dream bowl destination for UGA would have almost certainly been on the part of the majority of UGA fans, the Rose Bowl. It's just that game that, seems like almost like it takes place on another planet from an SEC standpoint, because it was historically always a Big Ten, Pac-12 type of game, or Pac-10 as it used to be known. It was always a bowl game for those conferences. Not a strong tie to the SEC. The college football playoff changes that. And, when you think about how Georgia fans would have once revered the Rose Bowl before they got a chance to go in modern times, obviously the 1942 team finished its season there. It's so cool to think about how great this thing turned out to be a year ago with UGA getting to go, not only winning the game, but winning one of the most dramatic Rose Bowls of all time. And I think a lot of Georgia fans will tell you that even though it was a very expensive trip, it was the kind of once-in-a-lifetime experience that they will never forget. So that was sort of a dream bowl destination accomplished there. I guess what's left on your bucket list, on your to-do list when it comes to bowl destinations, seeing UGA in Las Vegas there at the Sam Boyd Stadium, that seems like a pretty fun thing to do. Of course, I don't want to see Georgia fall back low enough to kind of get in there, but as a consolation prize for a not-so-great season, being in Las Vegas wouldn't be so bad on that. We'll weigh in on some of your comments. I'll also tell you this. For those of you watching live right now, I guess the Facebook comment section is not working right now. We'll take some YouTube comments on this, and then once our regular broadcast ends, we'll do more YouTube comments here coming up. We'll let you do that. Dapper Dan, by the way, says that if it wasn't a bad bowl game, he'd like to see the team go back to Hawaii again, like they did at the end of the Jim Donnan era. Yeah, listen, taking a trip to see the Dogs play in Hawaii would be a very nice thing. I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. I also, it's been a long time since we've seen Georgia in the Cotton Bowl. That Dallas destination is now a part of the college football playoff rotation here, so it's kind of exciting to think about Georgia back in Dallas for a game like that. I was always a bit frustrated that you didn't see Georgia there when it comes to that. Back in the Fiesta Bowl, I think that'd be kind of an interesting thing. We'll take more of these comments here on video, and if you want to reach out to me on Twitter at DawgNation Daily, we'll give you a chance to do that too. But for now, though, we need to get ready to wrap up our regular broadcast. And, of course, we do that every day the same way. As Jeff Sentell mentioned, our buddy Eddie here on the set with us loves it when we do the Gator Hater Countdown. And we do believe that a good Georgia fan is a Gator Hater, first and foremost. I have to admit, last night during that baseball game, I was watching a good bit of it, and I found myself rooting for Auburn, which I know that you don't want me to do, you don't like for me to do, but I did sort of like the idea of seeing maybe Florida lose its super regional game at home there. I'm tired of seeing the Gators in the College World Series. So I'm not loudly rooting for Auburn, but I was rooting for Auburn a bit in the hopes they'd take down the Florida Gators, because I believe that's what a good Georgia fan's supposed to do, root against Florida at all costs, I guess. And 137 days from right now, Georgia gets another chance to root against the Gators in football and another chance to see Georgia win. We think the Dogs are going to do it. We'll do our Gator Hater Countdown every day between now and then. We'll see you tomorrow right here on Dog Nation Daily as well. Hope you have a great day. And on video, as I said, the Facebook comments are not really working too well. I don't really quite know what's going on with that. I'm seeing the broadcast, but I am not seeing anything in the way of comments, and many of you seem to have checked out the broadcast too. I can't help but notice. Hopefully you've gravitated over to the YouTube comment section. We'll take some comments here on YouTube. If you're watching on Facebook, hop over, just do a quick search for a Dog Nation Daily YouTube, and it's the Dog Nation YouTube page. You can check us out there. We'll take live comments here on that page. here for a moment. Big Dog 95C on YouTube says, I want to see Sugar or Roses, BA. Yeah, it's been a while now for Georgia in the Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the place where you think of, great UGA teams going. What, the 2007 season? I guess you technically, the 2007 season, I guess, would be the last time Georgia was in the Sugar Bowl there. Also part of the 2005 Sugar Bowl was happened to be played in Atlanta. But it's been a while for Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. Travis Nunley says, as a UGA fan, my dream bowl is to see Auburn versus Florida in the Liberty Bowl. Yeah, that's kind of a funny thing to think about. I guess both these teams have taken trips to Birmingham here lately. Steve Shaffini checking in on YouTube. Good to see Steve on the YouTube page. Says, not a bowl, but being from New Jersey, I'd like to see a home-and-home with Penn State, or I'd like to see an easy win versus Rutgers. That's funny from Steve. Yeah, I'd love to see the Georgia Bulldogs in Happy Valley. Taking a trip up there to Beaver Stadium there in State College has always been, to me, one of the coolest stadiums to see on TV, especially when they do the night game. They get the big wide out, and, that's a pretty cool environment for college football. I'd like to see Georgia there. Juwan Brown switched over from Facebook. Juwan, appreciate you doing that. Dapper Dan says, at the rate of its growth, maybe one day we'll play in the Marco's Pizza Bowl. I like the idea of that, too. Maybe we can see Marco's get a bowl here at some point in time. Bruce Eklund says Jeff got interviewed by the Florida side of SEC country about recruiting. He said he was educating them on the dominance of UGA. That's pretty funny. Bruce Eklund says, yeah, play Penn State and Rutgers. That'd be a good place to play and recruit. Yeah, one of the things that people probably don't realize unless you follow recruiting pretty closely is, Western Pennsylvania, as many people are aware of, is very deep when it comes to recruits, especially historically quarterbacks. A lot of quarterbacks have come from that Western PA region, but surprisingly, a lot of good players have come from New Jersey. Who's been good at manning that? Now, lately, this is about the only feather in his cap when it comes to recruiting, but Jim Harbaugh has been good about getting talented players from New Jersey to come to Michigan. New Jersey's a better state than you might think of for recruiting. A lot of good players over the years have been from New Jersey. Some good running backs. Wisconsin had a couple of those good New Jersey running backs. That's a pretty good state for recruiting, believe it or not. Now, it's not comparable to some of the stuff down here, but in terms of putting elite players together, it's one of the states that you can get some elite players from. New Jersey is sort of a surprisingly good state when it comes to stuff like that. We had some family members from the team on the Facebook broadcast today. I always appreciate when our family from DawgNation checks in. We're always happy to have folks with us on the show today. Really appreciate that. Gorilla Mo says, should we be concerned with James Cook? I've seen some of the online chatter about this. We'll bring this up with Jeff on Friday. One thing about, Jeff said a moment ago is, and I think that Chip Tower's going to take the same approach on this, they're pretty slow on reporting some of these issues for guys who don't have the obligation of being on campus yet, granting them a little bit of privacy on this. That's something that's important to Chip and Jeff both. My assumption is that everything with James Cook's going to be fine until we hear otherwise, but I know there has been some online chatter about that. And, yeah, y'all are jumping all over me, rightly so, because I should have mentioned a moment ago when I was talking about good players from New Jersey that in the most telling example of this is Noshawn Marino at UGA, who came to Georgia, was from New Jersey, as Chase Duckett, Dapper Dan, Steve Shaffini, Bruce Eklund all reminding us of here, Enrique Murillo as well. That's absolutely a great get for Georgia from the Garden State there for sure. Miriam Corbin asking about a DawgNation invasion. We'll have to see about that, Miriam. We've been doing a lot of talking about a lot of that kind of stuff, so we'll have to see kind of where all that's going. I hope to be able to announce something on that kind of stuff pretty soon. Let me scroll up here and get a few more of the comments. I almost flipped over to Facebook, but I forgot that I'm not able to do that today. Brian Kephart talking about the G-Day stuff, about DeAndre Baker pulling an interception. Yeah, I mean, listen, Baker's going to be one of those guys that's going to be heavily counted on by Georgia this season for a reason we just mentioned. I think you feel pretty good about those starters. One of the things that does concern me a bit about the Georgia secondary, though, is, okay, so you got Baker, who's rock solid. I think LeCount can be heavily counted on. J.R. Reed may be a a big-time player this year. But secondary is one of those things where you can't really have a weak link, or that's all opposing offensive coordinators are going to focus in on. So what happens at the star position? It seems like, a freshman like Devon Wilson would have been in some discussion for that before he got hurt. It seems like a freshman like Otis Reese may get a chance to show off there. What happens to those other two defensive back positions, and what does your depth look like? I think that's going to be an important question for Georgia. Carlos Cardozo also asking about a DawgNation invasion. Carlos, we hope to be able to talk a lot about our in-season plans here pretty soon. All right, we kind of got to get out of here. I was late yesterday. Someone's asking about the retaliation T-shirts. Who's asking about that? Enrique Murillo asking about those retaliation T-shirts. So I've still got it on set with me. I haven't forgotten about these. Logistically, I'm having a little trouble figuring out how we're going to do this, but because I want to be able to do it for more than just people who live locally here. So we hope to be able to say something about that this week. Apologize for the delay on that. All right, we'll have the podcast up here pretty soon. Apple Podcasts, Android, the world-famous DawgNation.com. We've got SEC Country Live coming at 3 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon on all the SEC Country video channels. And we're back again tomorrow. Hopefully Facebook will be working. I'm not sure what's wrong with that today. But we're glad you're with us today. Thanks for checking in on YouTube here, and we'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m., for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great day.